Ave Maris Stella.
Hello, and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Lead Chance of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the StarCross Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 142, and we're covering Christus Dominus on the bishops, 42 to 44, on coordination offices between bishops, and the conclusion. So if you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we talked about defining ecclesiastical provinces or regions. Today we're going to talk about three short things. Each paragraph is kind of on its own, which is about bishops in interdiocesan offices, the military archdioceses, and then further applying what is talked about in this document. So we're gonna be in chapter 3. We're gonna conclude this document today, so everything is going to be concluded today. So we're in chapter 3 concerning bishops for the common good of many churches. 42, 43 are section 3.3, bishops having an interdiocesan office, and 44 is a general directive or conclusion. So let's go straight into paragraph 42. Now, paragraph 42 has three short subparagraphs, which I'll read together. So I'm going to just give one summary, which is that there's a possibility of having bishops take key role in interdiocesan offices. So let's get into the text. A. Since pastoral needs require more and more that some pastoral undertakings be directed and carried forward as joint projects, it is fitting that certain offices be created for the service of all or many dioceses of a determined region or nation. These offices can be filled by bishops. B. This sacred synod recommends that between the prelates or bishops serving these offices and diocesan bishops and episcopal conferences, there exists always fraternal association and harmonious cooperation in the expression of pastoral concern. C. These relationships should be clearly defined by common law. Right, so here we have these interdiocesan offices, right? There's various different ones. There's ones that are officially associated with the USCCB, and then there are ones that are kind of independent. For example, the National Catholic Partnership on Disability obviously has a consultative role for disability issues, but is not part of the USCCB as a separate organization. As an example, I'm not saying that's the only one, but that's the example I know best personally because I've been to their conference and things like that. And in certain ones of these offices, people could be a bishop. It's not that common. What is common is you'll have a priest there, and that priest is, serves his 4 or 5 year term and is named a bishop right afterwards. That's fairly common. For example, the USCCB has the general secretary of the USCCB, who's a priest who's kind of organizing, and almost every single one afterwards has been a bishop. The only one who was not named a bishop afterwards had an immense scandal, and that he left under the cloud of scandal, right? So now we need also a relationship between these offices and bishops, right? So it's great that the National Catholic Partnership on Disability works well with various dioceses in the U.S., for example, as one of these offices. Or, there's different organizations there's an organization for Latin American Youth Ministry, and how does that work with the various, national bishops' conferences and individual dioceses? That needs to be a good relationship both ways. Both directions need to work on that. So let's move on to paragraph 43, which is two short subparagraphs we're going to read together. And the topic here is military vicariates, dioceses, and archdioceses. A vicariate, which is mentioned in the number explicitly, is something that is at the level of a diocese, but is headed by a priest. What's often the case is, for example, in a mission territory, before there's enough established for it to be called a diocese, it will be called the vicariate, and then it will be headed by a priest, as opposed to a bishop, and that priest will have authority to assign the various priests in there. Obviously, he does not have the sacrament order, so he needs to rely on some bishop to ordain the men, but that's what we mean by a vicariate. It's just like a proto-diocese, what could become a diocese, or in certain cases, what will likely never become a diocese. As, for example, if you have a small nation and has a small military, its military vicariate will probably remain a vicariate forever. But let's read the number. A. Since because of the unique conditions of their way of life, the spiritual care of military personnel requires special consideration, there should be established in every nation, if possible, a military vicariate. Both the military vicar and the chaplains should devote themselves unsparingly to this difficult work in complete cooperation with the diocesan bishops. B. Diocesan bishops shall release to the military vicar a sufficient number of priests who are qualified for this serious work. At the same time, they should promote all endeavors which will improve the spiritual welfare of military personnel. Right, so that's pretty straightforward. We need it. I mentioned the vicariate here, and in bigger nations like the U.S. is the diocese, or in the U.S. case, archdiocese. But obviously, that is applying what this number says, right? And it is a challenging way of life because you're often switched between different places much more often. You're often at a military base. It might be separated from any kind of other population center, things like that. You might be in a war zone, and all those need specific pastoral care, and we need to do that, right? And so we need to establish the structures so that can be effectively done. And so, for example, maybe a chaplain continues with the unit to the war zone rather than staying at the base wherever he is and things like that. And they need to release more priests, right? We can't ignore these members of Christ faithful, and we need to give them the spiritual nourishment they require. And this happens in every nation. I know, for example, I know most about South Korea and the U.S. South Korea, just because South Korea has, you have to serve, I think it's like 2 years in the military or something like that, if you're a South Korean citizen. And so members of the Legions of Christ who join the community partway through formation have to go back and serve their enlisted time in the military, and often get sent as like chaplain assistants in the various places. So they tell us the stories about the military chaplains there in South Korea. So anyways, let's move on to paragraph 44, which is really the summary, as it's called, the general directive. It's basically saying, or the conclusion, it's basically saying, hey, what we've talked about in this document, let's put it into practice, right? Let's get the documents in place to put this into practice. And that's what it's really getting at. Paragraph 44A is talking about canon law and reflecting canon law to express what has been talked about in this document. And B and C are talking about guidebooks to help out. So let's read each of these paragraphs or subparagraphs individually. So 44A. This sacred synod prescribes that in the revision of the Code of Canon Law, suitable laws be drawn up in keeping with the principles stated in this decree. Due consideration should also be given to the observances made by the commissions and the Council Fathers. So, first of all, what is canon law? Canon law is the law of the church, right? You can look it up online. The best site to look it up is just canonlaw.ninja, canonlaw, one word, .ninja, which you can search for any kind of topic and the rules of the church, right? And that's what canon law is. It took about 20 years after the council, almost 20 years, to make canon law. So it's often referred to as the 1983 code because it was formally approved in 1983. And it sets the rules for like what bishops can do and how we define diocesan borders and how we establish new archdioceses, and all those kind of things are established in the church's law, right? So paragraph 44B is saying we need to make general guidebooks for bishops and priests. Let's read it. The Sacred Synod also prescribes that general directories be prepared treating the care of souls for the use of both bishops and pastors. Thus, they will be provided with certain methods which will help them to discharge their own pastoral offices with greater ease and effectiveness. Right, so we need these general rules for priests and for bishops. How do they live that pastoral office? And the Vatican office publishes both directories, which are more extensive, and vademecum, which are more, or handbooks, which are more precise. There's a vademecum for confessors, which is kind of like I think it's like 30 pages or something. It's kind of like a cheat sheet for confessors to remember all the key things. And these may not be as super widely distributed as you might think. Not every single pastor or bishop sees them. But one of the things that does happen with these is the people who are writing the textbooks, the people who are training in the seminaries, read them and apply them in there. So even if the priest does not know the exact directory, he probably knows what's in it because it was probably taught in the seminary, even if they didn't cite it from the directory. So it's kind of integrated to theology. That's part of what I do when I'm teaching those theology classes, part of my mission as a priest. So let's move on to paragraph 44C, which is talking not about these directories for the ministry of bishops or priests generally, but more specific guidebooks. Let's read it. There should be prepared also a particular directory concerning the pastoral care of special groups of the faithful as different circumstances of individual nations or regions require. Another directory should be composed concerning the catechetical instruction of the Christian people. This directory will consider the fundamental principles of such instruction, its disposition, and the composition of the books of the subject. In preparing these directories, special attention should be given to the views which have been expressed both by the commissions and the council fathers. right? So this is what we're talking about. It's these idea of directories. They're key points on all of one pastoral question, right? For example, there's a directory on popular piety, which has, a number of things on how we do popular piety, and that has examples, right? And the two that are listed here are the faithful and unusual circumstances, kind of like the military archdiocese or diocese or vicariates. We talked about the paragraph before, and other situations, traveling farm workers, things like that. And then catechetical instruction. How do we instruct people about the faith? And that mentions by regions, right? Because these type of things, both the kind of unusual circumstances and the way we do catechesis can vary by region and culture. And here they're saying, hey, don't just look at this document, also look at all the discussions and the subcommittees, all the that went around with these documents. So it's not just the final documents, which are the most important, but it's also the other documents as well. So this concludes Christus Dominus on bishops. If you got through this might be one of the hardest documents of the year to get through just because it applies to so few of us, and we probably don't know bishops as well. So if you got through this one, hooray, it's probably the hardest, and we'll probably get easier from here. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with Perfecte Caritatis, which is the document on religious life, like priests who are religious, like Franciscans, Jesuits, legionaries, and nuns. And it will start with an interview. I have an interview scheduled, but it's not recorded, so I'm not going to name the person in case it doesn't work out. If you want more information, like playlists and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. There's also a SQPN Discord with a channel for Vatican II in a Year at sqpn.com/Discord. Amen.